So we know that using an anticoccidial is going to create resistance, but we can slow that process down when we make good decisions.
Welcome to Future Feed Talks. In this episode, we'll dive into the realities of anticoccidial resistance, vaccine programs, and how the industry can collaborate to protect long-term gut health. I'm speaking with Dr. Judith LaBounty, poultry veterinarian, consultant, and a leader in sustainable animal health. With expertise spanning broiler, turkey, and layer production, she brings a unique blend of clinical insight, business strategy, and a strong commitment to animal welfare. This series is in cooperation with dsm-firmenich and Misset International. My name is Iris Hoffman, video editor, and I will be conducting this interview. Hello Judith, it's a pleasure to do this interview with you.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Let's jump in immediately. There are multiple coccidiosis programs. Is there a one-size-fits-all program for cocci control or not?
Unfortunately, no. There's multiple factors we need to consider when we're developing a cocci control program. We need to consider bird health, cost, and the requirements from our customers. So there's multiple factors that we need to consider, and we need to consider what product works best in that operation. Sometimes a product works well one place and not well another. So unfortunately, no, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
And in a previous presentation that I attended, you said we create anticoccidial resistance. That sounds like bad news. What are the main practices in the field that contribute to this resistance?
The main reason that we develop anticoccidial resistance in the field is using a single product for too long. So that gives the population time to develop a higher level of resistance because we kill susceptible oocysts, leave behind the resistant ones, and the resistant ones then reproduce. So our number one problem is using a product for far longer than it should be used.
So how does this resistance develop?
Resistance develops when we expose a population to a specific product. So for example, we can talk about this with cocci and anticoccidials, bacteria and antibiotics, intestinal worms and dewormers. Say we have a bird and they have cocci. We give them an anticoccidial, and that anticoccidial works really well and it kills most of the oocysts. However, there are going to be oocysts in that population that have, for some reason, a resistance to that anticoccidial. Those oocysts survive and are allowed to reproduce in the flock. Over time, that resistant oocyst becomes the dominant member of the population. So then we see resistance because we give them this anticoccidial, most of the population is resistant to it, and therefore we have coccidiosis despite it. This happens with bacteria and dewormers, and it can be a very significant issue. With anticoccidials, we'll start to see clinical coccidiosis in flocks that are highly resistant, and it definitely indicates that it's time to select a different product and program.
And what will be the first signs of resistance developing and really causing damage?
If you're doing posting sessions, you may begin to see increases in clinical signs and lesions. So you examine the intestines and begin to see more birds that have lesions consistent with cocci. In addition, when you do the gut scraping portion of the necropsy, you may begin to see higher and higher numbers of oocysts when looking at those samples under the microscope.
And that's the time you need to change your game?
Yes, if your gut health scores and if your gut scraping scores begin to increase, it's time to reevaluate.
I see. And if we are looking at the different programs, vaccine only and bio shuttle show the most promise. How effective are they in reversing resistance over time?
So it's believed, and the vaccine companies report, that if you use vaccine only for about 5 years, you would see complete return to susceptibility using only the vaccine. If you used a bioshuttle, you're still introducing an anticoccidial, which may slow that process, but right now the estimate is 5 years of vaccine only causes a complete return to sensitivity.
And what programs are you the most excited about?
So I am a big supporter of using vaccine only. My background before I got into broilers was long-lived birds, so turkey breeders and table egg birds. And I used vaccine in them exclusively. When I began working in broilers and found that we had a high level of resistance to multiple anticoccidials, I felt that using vaccine only was the best option, both in short term and long term, because it was going to be most effective in birds now, but set us up to succeed in the future by having a return to sensitivity.
I see your point, thank you. If we're looking at monitoring, what kind of monitoring is critical for assessing program efficacy, especially when vaccines are used?
Monitoring is extremely important regardless of what type of program that you're using. So my favorite way to monitor is using a posting session or doing a necropsy session. So we would take birds from farms every 6 weeks for the necropsy session and examine our gut health and levels of cocci in their intestines to determine how well we were doing on our program. The other great thing about a posting session is that you get to assess overall bird health. So not only does it support your cocci program, it supports your other bird health programs as well.
I've heard you say that problems aren't always caused by coccidiosis itself. How can producers better differentiate and diagnose issues in the field?
So yes, just because we're losing production doesn't mean that it has to be coccidiosis. There are a lot of other causes. Immunosuppression, mycotoxin, respiratory challenge, poor management. So before I make a decision about my coccidiosis program, I go back to my posting session, especially if I have data from past sessions that I can compare to. So my recommendation before making a change is to always consult with your veterinarian, and if they want to do a posting session, to go ahead and do that and compare to previous results.
And would you say that phytogenics and other novel compounds are viable long-term solutions or more complementary to traditional approaches?
I have used them as a complementary program. So I have personally used them when I had too much resistance to certain products, especially the products that we use to kind of troubleshoot coccidiosis in the field. But phytogenics can be part of our traditional programs, like a shuttle or a bio shuttle, by replacing a more traditional anticoccidial in those programs. Also, a phytogenic can be put on top of whatever traditional program a company may be using.
And can you explain to me how phytogenics actually work?
Phytogenics have both anticoccidial and anti-inflammatory components, which is why they are excellent for, in my case, troubleshooting gut health problems. So I've used it in pullets and broilers when we were facing health problems that were caused by coccidiosis, but we were having issues in addition, like resistance or necrotic enteritis. I found being able to use a product that's both anticoccidial and anti-inflammatory to be extremely effective.
Interesting. And to wrap up, what role can producers, veterinarians, and regulators each play in slowing or reversing anticoccidial resistance?
We all have a role to play in preventing and reversing anticoccidial resistance. The most important is to develop and execute and monitor an appropriate plan. So we know that using an anticoccidial is going to create resistance, but we can slow that process down when we make good decisions.
Thank you, Judith, for this interview. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me.